All right, so before the break,
Yes.
we got up to when you actually became, I guess, technically a real writer. I mean, at this point now, you've got stuff coming out, you've got things in magazines and whatever. So to jump back, and Barry had asked me this over the break, why weren't you in the Pen Book Horror Stories at that point? Because obviously it was the major market in Great Britain for everybody. Did you ever submit? Did you ever think about submitting?
No, I think...
Or were you already like two above that?
It wasn't, no, I don't think it was so much that. I think it was really that I regard Arkham House as being my only market. It was a bit, in a way, it was, too much influence of Lovecraft in that sense. You know, just as he regarded Weird Tales as being his only real market. I kind of, well, I think the simple truth is I was, you know, pretty unsure of my worth as a writer. I was, you know, happy that Arkham House was publishing me, but I had very much sense of being able to submit anywhere else. I think Durst did say around the Inhabitant period that, you know, there's not really much point in submitting to, say, FNSF because, you know, they didn't take Lovecraftian material. Sure. So even when I started branching out, as with, you know, the Sellers, when I was 19, I still really wasn't sending anything anywhere else. And it wasn't until Bob Lowndes, R.A.W. Lowndes, he who...
An old-time fan.
Yes, who edited several magazines, Magazine of Horror, Startling Mystery Stories, for Health Knowledge Incorporated in America, which largely, these funny little... They were
cheap reprints, basically.
They were slightly smaller than Digest, weren't they? And kind of stapled through the middle, basically, so it didn't have a spine as such. But he wrote an editorial about Travellers by Night, which was the August Earth anthology that contained my story, The Sellers, and he singled it out for analysis. And to be fair, you know, he said, you know, that not all the metaphors were all that good, but he did say they were fresh, you know, and he analysed the story in some detail. And I thought, well, basically, here's another market. So I sent him the story of The Scar of mine, which I'd written, we're now talking about 1967, and he duly bought it, and I think he said he would buy more stuff, but in fact the magazines then
the whole line went down.
You know, shortly. In fact, I'm famous for killing. You know, my effect on any market is toxic, believe me.
Now, by this time, you've left the tax office. You're now a librarian.
Yeah, now 67. Yes, I was. Yeah, working at Liverpool Public Libraries. That's right.
Was that more to your taste?
Yes.
Obviously?
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
I suspect the Ramsey Campbell section was like lots of...
Well, it didn't exist. No.
No, I mean as a curator.
Oh, well, no, because
Did you try to get stuff in, or...?
Not particularly, no. It wasn't because I think that all that existed probably was there, you know, was easily available. But in those days, of course, you did not have a horror section.
No, that's true.
You know, that everything was... And this was part of the fun for me of as a reader in libraries as well as someone working there. It was precisely that you could... You know, just go through what was on the shelf, and all of a sudden there would be a promising-looking title, or indeed a promising-looking cover. You'd grab that, and it would prove to be what you thought, or not. You know, in some cases.
Now I'm going to jump on because we're running out of time, unbelievably.
Good Lord!
You're starting to become firmly established. You're starting to become established as a writer. You're starting here and there. You're starting to get into anthologies, stuff like this. I've already met you by this point at a science fiction convention in Birmingham in the 70s, and you very kindly took me under your wing, you and Jenny and David Sutton and Sandra Sutton and people, and I can remember what an amazing...
We didn't know what monster we had created.
What an amazing event it was when you decided, you'd been known up to this point as a short story writer.
Sure.
And then you decided to write, you know, The Doll Who Ate His Mother, and it was published in 1976. What prompted you to go from short story writer to novelist? Was it money? Was it the time?
Yes, it was. Well, let me backtrack a little bit because you know, first story published in '62. It wasn't until 11 years later that I went full time as a writer, and this was, and as I keep saying, if Jenny had not been there, you know, I would not be speaking to you right now, because basically In 73, I then brought out my second book, Demons by Daylight.
You can't do every book.
No, I know that, but that was, you know, a much more personal book.
Yes, it was much more Ramsey Campbell.
Yeah. And the point was that Ted Klein, T-E-D Klein, who, you know, a very fine writer in his own right, also edited, well, later on was to edit Twilight Zone magazine. He wrote this extraordinary exegesis of my stuff, mainly Demons by Daylight, in a semi-prosine. Now, I'd never met him. I'd met him later on, of course, but it was nobody I knew. I'd read his work, I think. And he'd got everything that I wanted to be in that book. You know, given that, you know, here was something I didn't...
He understood it.
Yeah.
He understood everything was in there.
And so since I felt, well, you know, if I'm communicating like that, well, maybe I can do it. And so I duly, insanely, on the basis of 2 limited edition short story collections, decided, okay, I'm going to go full time. Now, I did also have an agent, it was Kirby Macaulay.
He was everybody's agent.
Yeah, because Kirby had decided basically to be the agent of a lot of British writers.
If anybody doesn't know, Kirby Macaulay was I think he was a used car salesman or a car salesman.
No, it was for Sears Roebuck.
Sears Roebuck was.
He was a salesman.
But
from
what he
Minneapolis.
Done, he looked around the genre and said, who is not being represented now, who may have been a great writer 10, 15, 20 years ago, and who are the young and up-and-coming writers, which is why he co-created the World Fantasy Convention and things like that. And what he did, was brilliant, was he just brought all these people together.
That's right, Robert Aikman.
So you would have Robert Aikman, Robert Bloch, Manny Wade Wellman, but also you'd have Ramsey Campbell, Charles L. Grant, Stephen King, Peter Straub, all these people. And so there was this melting point in the 70s where this old and new came together.
That's right.
And we all got to know each other. I mean, we all got to meet these guys and hang out with these guys. So when Ramsey was growing up reading Weird Tales in Liverpool when he was 14 years old, we got to meet the guys who were writing for Weird Tales at that point. It was almost like a bridging exercise.
It was,
and
indeed.
Kirby was responsible for that.
Yes, he was.
Very much so.
That's right.
So he was your agent. So what did he suggest to do the novel?
Yes, because I mean, basically, you know, 1973 to 75, I was just writing short stories.
Exactly. And, and you were very successful at that as well. That's not.
Well,
you win pretty much a lot of stuff.
Well, I was in a few things, but I mean, there was not. It certainly was not making a living. And so Kirby actually did say...
Well, can you make... Here's a question. Can you make a living as a short story writer, do you think?
Well, you know, Harlan does.
Possibly back then?
No, maybe in those days. These days...
Dennis Etchison would be
Dennis, yes, that's right. Well, he wrote novels too, of course.
Eventually, he had novels.
Yeah, I think most of us do, you know, but... make a living, I don't know. But certainly Kirby, you know, gently but persistently said, you need to write a novel. And so eventually I did come up with The Doll. And even then, I had to ease myself into the whole notion of writing a novel, even though, of course, I'd tried it before, just hadn't finished them.
So possibly, that's always the problem with novels, isn't
possibly hovering in the background was this notion of these unfinished novels that I'd done years earlier, well, more than a decade earlier, actually. And I remember just waking up one morning I think it was my birthday, in fact, in when it would have been 75, and coming up with the first line, which was, there were no taxis. I thought, oh, well, you know, I'll go and write that down. And as these things do, it led to the next sentence, and off we went eventually. And so that was my first novel.
And it was published, and it was actually very successful.
No, it wasn't.
Well, I think it was. You had an American publisher.
And it was crap.
Well, it made a difference.
Eventually, to be fair, it did. But no, I would just say this: that you know, I went over for the first World Fantasy Convention in
Providence.
Yes, indeed, in 75, where, among many other things, I heard Fritz Leiber read The Haunt of the Dark at Midnight, which, believe me, was quite an experience, and met Bob Bloch and Frank Belknap Long and many other people. But while I was in New York, I went out for lunch or dinner, actually, with my editor at Bob's Merrill, Barbara Norville, who was also Bob Bloch's editor, and I said, you know, how's the book doing? And she said, dreadfully. So that was a start. I said, how are the reviews? And she said, well, there's a bad review and a mixed review. So,
I take the mixed review.
Yeah, I said, that's right. So, exactly. So I said, show me the mixed review. Yeah. And I read this, which I think it was Publishers Weekly, which said, you know, cardboard characterization, contrived plot. And so I said, well, now show me the mixed review, and she said that was the mixed review. There you are.
How hard was it for you to write a novel?
Once I got going, not hugely hard, but on the other hand, I don't know, I'd got out of the ludicrous practice by then of regarding it as a sort of 5-day-a-week job, because certainly when I'd originally gone full-time, you know, because I'd worked, well, actually in libraries you didn't, you did work 5 days, but sometimes you get Saturdays. But anyway, I kind of regard it as being 5 days a week and then take Saturday and Sunday off, because I'm not, you know. And on Sunday, celebrate by eating a cob of hashish, which is a good way to spend the weekend, I find. But you know, eventually, I don't know at what point I persuaded myself that really you should do this 7 days a week, and I duly then did that. And I think by this stage, by the stage of writing the novel, I was doing it. But even then, I had this absurd notion that I'd finish a chapter, and then the next day's work, we reread the chapter. Well, that's not bloody work, for God's sake. You know, so now, you know, I write every day.
You are one of the few writers I know who've kept notebooks of everything. I mean, one of the great things, Mandy and I went to a breakfast. I remember you were writing notes down at a convention one time. You keep...
Yeah.
How many notebooks do you have now? I mean, it must be hundreds.
Innumerable. Well, lots of them are in.
But they're all just ideas or sentences or.
Oh, all sorts.
How
of
long
stuff.
have you been doing that?
Oh gosh, I would have thought since 40 years at least. Yeah, it must have been around.
Is that something you would recommend to writers?
Well, it works for me.
I know.
For me. But always, I would say always carry a notebook. But now, obviously, you carry your phone,
or your electronic notebook.
Yeah, exactly. You use whatever you've got as a notebook. But yeah, I think the thing is, otherwise, firstly, and it has happened to me in the past, but no longer. Otherwise, you get what maybe or may not be a good idea, and then 2 hours later, you forgot what the hell it was. So unless you put it down, it's gone.
And do you still go back to those notebooks and go through them and go?
I do. Oh well, the weirdest example of this I think I've had recently. This was not very long ago. It was when Don Doria, sadly now the defunct Samhain Publishing.
But now a new editor at
no,
he's in this country.
Who is using, now I'm now working with again, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, with the new.
Oh, are you?
New, yeah.
Okay.
But the thing was...
the Firebird.
Flame tree.
There you go.
Yeah.
Close enough.
But sort of.
Fire.
Yeah.
Give me a break.
Yeah, absolutely. But when he brought out a reprint of Dark Companions, which is an early collection of mine from the
early 70s, mid-70s, 74.
Is it? Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it is something like that, isn't it? And I did it afterward. And as luck would have it, I discovered I had a lot of the notes for the stories in that book. I mean, actually, God help us, Jenny will remember this. At that stage, I didn't have a notebook. I had this bloody ledger. I mean, seriously, it was like so thick and kind of A4.
Dickensian.
I was sort of dragging it around with me. So, we went off on holiday to the Lake District, and I put it in the suitcase, in which it was probably half the weight, And of course, you didn't have wheels on your suitcase either, so I would drag this wretched thing.
So old,
yes.
They didn't have wheels on the suitcase. That's how old this was.
So I discovered this, and what I found in there were notes for an old story of mine called The Companion, which some people like. In fact, the second half is good enough. I wish the first half were better, but anyway. And what's interesting to me is that the original notes I made, I then departed from so completely that the original notes are pretty well another story, and so I wrote that story quite recently. So, 40 years later, I wrote the story I planned to do in the first place. Yeah.
So, I'm going to get away a little bit from what you're known for, which is basically, these kind of crazy, strange novels and wacky stuff. Although I do want to ask you.
Of paranoia.
I do want to ask you.
Paranoia.
I'm going to say, how much does humour play in your stories and your novels?
Oh, increasingly.
What is the? Do you have a sense of why? Do you put it in there purposely?
No,
you are a mischievous person.
It's instinctive.
You've always been a mischievous.
I'd say I don't know about that. Well, I don't know.
But you have a certain sense of black humour about what you do.
Well, I don't know. I've been known to send people off to restaurants that don't exist, but that's a quite different.
Well, I think it's just been me personally.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a very good Jewish fish restaurant near us called Yom Kippur, for instance. That's the best joke you hear all night. God help the rest of them.
But no, you tend to use humour and horror, and
I think they're indivisible, really, for me. I mean, and that's why I love, Michael Ripper coming on the Hammer film and doing a comic, the port. The porter scene from Macbeth. Hammer were very fond of the comic interlude, and when you got people like Miles Malleson, why not? And Michael Ripper, of course. But for me, it's much more just part of the narrative. I won't particularly sort of hive it off as a comic scene. It's just. It would be fun enough. It was Ted Klein once again. He what he said. Images both comical and bleak. He said was even of those early stories he felt was a kind of an aspect. But I'll tell you exactly where it happened, where I became aware of this. Now we need a bit of context. There was a novel of mine from the late 80s called Midnight Sun, which was my first attempt, to do sort of Algernon Blackwood, the sort of cosmic terror, terror without violence, if you like, just the sense of the cosmic. And I think of all, and there's certainly a few candidates, but probably that was the most difficult novel I ever wrote. It was an absolute swine to write. I mean, I think halfway through, or probably less than halfway through, I genuinely thought, this is so dreadful, do I even want to carry on, And I did, because I'd written like 50 pages. And by then I wouldn't abandon something I would possibly avoid it. But I did rewrite particularly the first section of that book very thoroughly, and in fact reduced it to about half its length, I think. And as I say, it was really, really arduous to do. I mean, I think it's an honourable failure, the book, but it's worth doing. But now, while I was doing it, Deborah Beale at Legend, she was doing a series of novellas, and she got Ian McEwan.
And they were nice, doing hardcover.
That's right. Yeah. She got Ian McEwan, got Ballard, and she asked me to do one. And I was sort of resistant to this because I'd never done a novella. I wasn't sure I would be able to do one, but eventually, I thought, well, maybe I did have an idea that would work. I think it was Brian Aldiss actually somehow commented somewhere that a novella should be, the unity should be quite compressed, or it should take place possibly
by its own name novella.
Well, but I'm thinking more in terms of maybe taking place over a quite
short period of time.
Limited. Yes, exactly. Right. That's right. And so I thought, well, maybe just over one day, And then Kneading Ghosts came my way. And I got some notes for an idea. I thought, well, maybe this could be a novella. I thought, so I began it. And about 4 days into it, and we got to a scene where the unlucky central character has gone as far as the bus terminal, and he's looking at the destinations on the front of buses which are not yet ready to leave. And I wrote them. I thought, well, actually, these names are a lot odder than I thought they were going to be. What do I do now? So, well, just follow along and see where this leads. And after that, I've never had this experience before or since. I wish I could have it again. It actually wrote itself. The whole thing, I was actually going up to my workroom every morning just to kind of catch up with it. It was going so fast. And I did probably the least revision on that of any stuff of recent, last 30 years anyway, that I've ever done. It was just there. And it was just the subconscious going straight onto the page. And it made me laugh immoderately while I was writing it.
Oh, it's a funny story.
It felt very much like a release. So the next novel I wrote, probably almost immediately after that, was The Count of 11. Now, again, this was basically supposed to be a novel it was a non-supernatural about a very ordinary, not so much the serial killer who lives next door as the serial killer we could be, just ordinary folk just pushed over the edge. But again, I was about halfway through the second chapter and I thought, actually this is a comedy. What do I do now? And I just thought, well, if that's what it wants to be, off it goes. And I think my favourite review, one of my favourite reviews of anything of mine, I think it was the Telegraph, said if Stan Laurel had been a serial killer, this might have been the story. Well, as a Laurel and Hardy fan, what really could I have appreciated more?
Interesting you bring that up. As somebody who's got a huge amount of experience behind you, would you recommend to would-be writers to write what they want to write rather than write to a market?
Yes.
Or write to,
yes.
because I mean, you've always done this. You've never really written about
not
contract.
all,
well, not always, because we're going to get into a little bit about novelization.
Fair enough.
But pretty much
mostly
you go into a book. You may have a title or whatever, but not pretty much more any than that.
Yeah.
And is it? I mean, I see so many writers now who want to write bestsellers.
Yeah.
Who want to be famous. What's your sense of that
if you
way
want
of
to
approaching
do it,
the book?
then, but it's not for me.
It's not for you.
Probably because I can't do it. Basically, it's funny because I remember, gosh almighty, years ago, this was when I was headline, and it wasn't the great Peter Lavery who was my editor there, and John Jarrell, of course, was also involved. So two tremendous folk. But it was, I think, it was probably the lead editor at Headline. Oh, she wasn't trying to be nasty or anything, but she did say to me, that you can't write a bestseller set in the north of England. And my sort of instinct was, well, I don't really want to write a bestseller. I just want to write what engages my imagination, even then, and more so now. But I would just say, as a sort of riposte to that Jeremy Dyson, he of the League of Gentlemen, cites, the very fact that I'd set this stuff in the north of England as one of their main starting points in the League of Gentlemen.
How they got into it.
Yeah,
how
that's
they
what
came
he
into
said.
the genre.
That's what he said. Yeah. So they realised you could do that in the north of England. And I would say, the League of Gentlemen is horror masquerading as comedy, and not even masquerading that much at times.
No, absolutely. And of course, he's then become a fan of Aikman and.
Oh yes, I think he always was actually.
And you have all that stuff, which is great. It all feeds into the same
I think
genre we all live in now.
Yeah.
But you've also done work for hire. And
don't mind doing
I
that.
know that basically a lot of what Miskatonic does is movie oriented.
Okay.
So I wanted to get onto a little bit of the movie stuff. Because they say basically we can't go through every book you've done.
No.
Go be all night.
Well, they're all terrible anyway, so carry on.
But you did do some novelization.
I did.
And you did 3, I believe, for Universal, which would be Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula's Daughter, and the Wolfman.
That's right.
And then you also did a novelization of the recent Solomon Kane movie, which I adored, I've got to say. How was that different for you? How was that writing to order, I guess?
Well, and also to be fair, it's not the only writing to order I've done, because occasionally, an anthologist will, give you a sort of template, or parameters within which to work.
Yeah.
They will say. I will come back to the movies almost immediately, but I mean, for instance, it wasn't even an anthology. It was a local newspaper in Liverpool. They approached me, the features editor, to do a Christmas and New Year ghost story, about 2,000 words long, using lots of Merseyside locations, and basically set from Christmas Eve till about New Year's Day or New Year's Eve. So I actually wrote a story called Calling Card. And I duly gave it to them, and they said, this is too gruesome, we can't publish it. Well, you might have looked at...
You're talking to,
you might have looked at what I do in the first place. But the irony, well then, funny enough, first of all, Lynn Carter then bought it for Weird Tales, which he'd then revived as an anthology series. But then, years later, the very same Liverpool Daily Post came back to me, now with a different featured editor, said, can you write a Christmas ghost story? So I sent them the same story, and they published it. So not sure what that means. But the point is, it was very much within, set limits. And I think that's a discipline, personally.
Yes.
I think it's very useful.
The people we knew,
not all
people
the time.
like Manny Wellman and H. Warnerman and Bob Block, they would sometimes have to write to a cover brief or
that's right. Absolutely.
And you like that. You like that discipline.
Yes, I do. But so to come back to the movie books.
The movie stuff.
Yeah. Well, no, the 3 Universal horror films together, I like them all very much. But it was interesting to me that they in each case, as I said, Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula's Daughter, The Wolfman, they brought me up here and showed me the films at a viewing theatre, and gave me a a photocopy of the original shooting script.
Wow.
Now that's interesting, which is now in the Science Fiction Foundation library in Liverpool. Those scripts, and there were interesting differences. And to my mind, the most crucial difference was in the Wolfman, where Kurt Siodmak, and he actually types it in capitals, obviously it's so important to him, is that the Wolfman should only ever be seen from his own viewpoint, so in reflections and in the water.
Like Lady in the Lake.
So in other words, not the entire film, but his transformation. So, in a sense, it can be taken as being subjective.
Psychological.
Yeah, well, obviously Universal weren't going to have that. No. They wanted, a hairy monster, which is fair enough, But it's interesting, I think probably that's why possibly Siodmak then went to work with Val Lewton, who was obviously more amenable to suggestive stuff. So I tried to put some of that into the novelization. Now, I have to say each of those took me about 4, 5, 6 weeks to write. So they were
wow.
And I tried to keep it as much as I possibly could, both of the film and on the whole of the script. But my theory is always, my attitude has always been that, there's no reason, and there's no more reason why, or no less reason I should say, why a film based on a script should be any better than a novel based on a film,
based on a script, right.
It's
its own entity.
It's a transformation.
Thing,
You're somebody working into a different
sure.
medium. And the same in the case of Solomon Kane, I had, about 6 different drafts of the script, which had various different elements in them. And I tried to, because I gathered that some of it was because they couldn't actually shoot that material, they didn't have enough time, or they didn't have the budget. So I tried to incorporate bits that it seemed to me they would have liked to include in the novel. And
now, did they come to you because you'd already done some Solomon?
Yes, because I suppose we should explain.
Long time, years before.
This was one of the things. You see, this is one of the things that I did when Kirby was trying to get me work. This was in '76, in fact. That, in fact, it was to be fair, I think it was actually Don Grant who was. Did he not hold the rights to? Yeah. So he was Robert E. Howard's. Effectively the agent for the estate, and he suggested me for Solomon Kane because I was a British writer, and those were the Robert E. Howard stories that were set in Britain, and there were 3 uncompleted Solomon Kane stories, and I was very happy to give them a shot. And in fact, I got those little paperbacks with the unfinished stories in them. Gosh, I remember I was waiting for Jack Sullivan, the Jack Sullivan of anthologist fame, and also wrote lots of stuff on music.
Penguin Book of...
He did the Penguin Book of Horror and the Supernatural. He also did a book called Hitchcock's Hitchcock's Music, Barry, was it?
It was.
Yeah, about the music in Hitchcock's films. And but this is rambling, I know, but
it's fine. We're rambling now. Second half.
Oh right, well yeah, I used to do readings at his apartment on the Upper West Side in New York, but the thing was I was waiting for him I don't remember why. Oh, because presumably we're going on the Staten Island ferry just as a trip, and Jenny and I were waiting there. I remember kind of reading one of the stories. It was the Castle of the Devil, actually, the fragment that Howard had left, and by the time we got on the ferry I'd figured out how I would develop it. So yeah, there we go.
And you absolutely count those. I mean, because you've done one book under a pseudonym that I'm aware of before, but those books you didn't. You actually put your name on them.
Oh yes.
And they are part of your.
Oh yes. And the only when you're thinking of the Claw, the pseudonym.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh,
J. Ramsey.
Yeah. Well, it was meant to be as obvious a pseudonym as it could possibly be. Because obviously, the first book was by J. Ramsey Campbell. Yeah. But no, I mean, the only reason for that was simply that my actual publishers were backed up with stuff, the new novel and a new collection. And so Carol Smith actually was my British agent, got me this job of doing this for Rosie Cheetham at, would have been Futura, wouldn't it? I think, MacDonald Futura. But, rather than compete with the new book of mine that was signed book, as you say, with my name on it, was coming out, that we thought it would be better to put a pseudonymous name on it.
Has Claw ever come out under your own name?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
Tor did it.
Oh, taught it. Like,
yes, definitely.
But the point I was trying to make was that the novelizations, which are honest work.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
And you are happy to. I mean, a lot of people I know are writers who will put a different name when they do a novelization. Yes. You were very happy to
oh no! I mean, to be honest, no. I'm more than happy to own up to it. But no, it actually came out of the house name. If you remember, it was Carl Dreadstone,
of course. And
Carl
then
Dreadstone.
And then also in this country, E.K.
Leighton.
A whole different fake name.
I have no idea. Right. E.K. Leighton was nothing to do with me. And I have to say, Carl Dreadstone was a different thing as well, because originally I wanted it to be Carl Thunstone, right?
Manly Wade Wellman.
Indeed. And I meant it because Manly Wade Wellman had a character, of course, called John Thunstone, was a series character. I just thought, Carl Thunstone was a good name. I mentioned it to Mandy, and he thought that people might think he'd written it. Not that he would have been ashamed of it. In fact, I'd probably hadn't even written these books yet. But so I said, okay, well, I'll come up with something else. And Piers Dudgeon, who was actually my first British editor ever, now doing all histories around the country, in fact, publishing those. So I went out for lunch with them in the days when publishers bought you lunch.
Doesn't happen anymore.
No, by God.
Not for us anyway.
well, it does on occasion. Yeah, but anyway.
All right, so I've been to your house. You've got a lot.
And survived.
You've got a lot of movies in your house.
What more?
You obviously adore film.
A whole lot more than last time.
Yeah, last time I was there as well.
God,
yeah.
Yes.
Now, the first stuff I actually remember reading from you, under the J, and that's John Ramsey Campbell.
Yes.
Before you changed, I think you legally changed your name.
I did. Yes.
Were in magazines like Castle Frankenstein, if everybody remembers that, and Low-Incroyable Cinema, the wonderful, he ran for 4 or 5 issues.
Harry Nadler and Chuck Partington,
And you've always had this interest in film.
I love the cinema.
And also, the cinema for you is very eclectic. I mean, you'll look at Turkish movies, you'll look at Hollywood movies, you'll look at everything. You are. What do you think it is about movies that so fascinates you? And you pretty much watch movies every day, don't you?
Yeah, well, I think pretty well we do. When I finish work in the day, because so start work at 6 in the morning and tend to knock off about mid-afternoon. Then we watch a film, generally speaking. And in fact, weirdly enough, I won't bore everybody with this, but we watched, as a Valentine's Day treat, we watched It Happened One Night yesterday. So that's obviously, now we're getting eclectic in itself, isn't it? And there's a very strange moment in that film that I've never seen before. Anyway, we haven't time to talk about that.
It actually was the spanking sequence, which nobody's ever seen.
Oh yes, well that is, no, there is one in there.
Yeah, there is.
Oh, there you go.
There we go, yeah.
Yes, that's by the way. What was the question?
The question was, you are very much a movie guy. I mean, more so than many writers I know.
Yeah.
You've always loved movies.
I've always loved movies, yes, and I have the greatest respect for them. I think it's a major art form. I suppose, when did I fall in love with them? I really honestly don't know.
Did you go to cinema as a kid? Did you?
Oh yes, very much so, yeah. The first one I ever saw was Snow White, the Disney.
Not the original release, though, obviously.
Not the original release, but it's been very early 50s, though, 51, or maybe even earlier than that. I'm absolutely terrified by it, utterly terrified. And it was funny of 2 things in that film, Snow White. One was the magic mirror,
with the face, yeah.
Yeah, the face, exactly. I think it was the terror of looking in the mirror and seeing something other than your own face. And I mean, God knows that there's stuff in Disney that's very psychedelic in that, and in Dumbo as well. You do wonder, well, probably too early for people to be dropping stuff, but you certainly, there's something going on there for sure, because that face in the mirror, which is constantly flowing and
grey and death-like,
absolutely,
or whatever, like a death mask, yeah.
There's that, but the other thing, and I'm sort of answering your question, which I'll do in a bit more.
We are chatting.
More detail. But the other thing, I think this is the earliest example of this for me, that the suggestion of terror, there's worse out there than is being defined. Toward the end, there's what's meant to be, sort of, because given Snow White's a pretty relentless movie, isn't it? It's, there's lots of fun in it, but there's also lots of menace. And toward the end, you get what's about to be a sort of relief scene, if you like. It's where the 7 do a kind of, song and dance for Snow White. which is supposed to be fun, and it is fun. But my thing was this: in the background of many shots, there's a window that looks out onto the forest. There's just utter darkness out there, and by now we know that the old queen has, transformed herself into the crone, and she's got the poisoned apple. And I remember just thinking, she's going to appear at that window. There's just blank darkness out there, but it was clear to me that something was going to loom up at that, and I spent the whole scene in a state of utter terror.
Waiting for something to appear at the window.
Yeah, exactly. So basically that's where I come from.
But also, I mean, there's the scene in that film where Snow White runs through the forest.
Yes.
And Arthur Rackham designed the trees and everything else in that element to create that sense of claustrophobia.
Yes. Oh gosh,
yes. Amazing.
Yes.
Anyway, it's a pretty scary
movie.
Right,
but all right, a bit more about movies.
Yeah.
I mean, just random memories, really, or
Sure.
The first one, I remember the first one I fell in love with in terms of, I was 10, I think, and the first film I ever remember thinking, the colour in this is just so astounding, and that was This Island Earth.
Okay.
Which I still think, I'm still waiting for a good Blu-ray of that, but with luck we'll see it. But, the colour is very intense in that film. And then, really, I went to various films with that with my mother, because, obviously in those days, and you folks won't remember this, obviously, partly we old buggers do.
I went with my parents.
Yeah, but we couldn't get into X films, because most horror movies, nearly all, oddly enough, with the exception of most of the Val Lewton films, would have an X, which meant you've got to be 16 or appear to be 16 to get in. So this became increasingly a forbidden fruit, even after famous monsters of Filmland began to appear, because I saw that in the shop one day when the first issue came out with half a crown sticker on it. Bought that and bought them religiously after that. So I saw lots of images of films I couldn't actually go and see.
Exactly the same as
Right. So I mean, I think I was 14. Actually, I think I'm right in saying the first horror was Baptism of Fire. Obviously, the first one I ever saw with my mother was Psycho. So you can't do much better. Can't do much better.
How old were you when you saw Psycho?
14.
Yeah. Okay. So, but she went with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, she liked Hitchcock films. Although I see she'd much care for that, too much psychiatry is about for her. And then a couple of more. I mean, Taste of Fear, The Hammer, I think. And then I plucked up the courage to go to our local downtown Isolde in Liverpool by myself. And the very first thing I ever went to see was House of Wax and Macabre, a double bill. That's House of Wax in 3D, by gum. That's pretty striking stuff. And Macabre, which has the famous warning that you're insured by
Lloyd's of London.
Death by fright, And I actually did sit there, because at the end something comes up saying, you've still got 2 minutes to go, So I was sitting there kind of basically thinking, am I going to die or not?
I got 2 minutes.
I think the following week was a double bill of The Hammer, Dracula and The Mummy. And, and very shortly after that, Night of the Demon, and that was which is my all-time favourite horror movie. So and on from that. But the other thing was this, that not long into my now adventuresome film going career, because I now went every Saturday, half a crown to the Isolde, and then out to the because in those days lots and lots of local suburban cinemas, most of which were decrepit beyond belief, but they were showing all these films I'd wanted to catch up with. Now I could, and the Isolde was showing the Cyclops by Burt I. Gordon,
Jr.
Yeah, and which essentially is the amazing colossal man, but with his scalp hanging over one eye. Yeah, and on this, supporting this was a film that I knew nothing at all about. Came on the screen. I thought, what the hell is this? There's writing down the bottom of the screen. What is that? What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to look at the film or read this stuff? And about 10 minutes in, I was just sitting there basically not really believing I was seeing what I was seeing on the cinema screen, and thinking, this has gone so far beyond anything I can imagine. And this was Buñuel's Los Olvidados, which still sadly lacks a good home release as far as I know. I mean, I've got a decent Spanish DVD, but that's as far. I'm sure at this very moment someone somewhere is restoring it. But I mean, that's Buñuel. It's his realist film, if you like. It's about street kids in Mexico City. I mean, probably folks have seen City of God, but believe me, that pales into insignificance against the Buñuel.
And what a perfect double bill.
Well, yes,
with the cycles,
absolutely. But somehow, that was the last film that gave me nightmares. Was the Buñuel? Oh no, actually, Alibaba was, but that was certainly one of the last. The Buñuel, and there's very typically of Buñuel. There's a dream sequence which is not signalled. All of a sudden you're in this scene, and you suddenly think, what's going on? It's a young protagonist and the older rival for his mother's affections, who's part of the street gang, and they're fighting for a side of beef that's under her bed, which is just so literal. It's just presented literally, and I don't know why, but I remember having a nightmare about that night after I'd seen the film. But it seemed to me that what was going on in that film was, well, it seems to me now, that he pushes realism so far that it also kind of spills over into surrealism. And also obviously uses dream. And that was a huge influence on how I wrote, once I really hit my own way of doing it. So, that and Last Year in Marienbad, those were the two huge influences, I suppose, on
interesting.
ways of doing
actually,
it.
going from a Mexican director, so your own work has only been adapted to the screen in Spain.
That's right. And
3 times, right?
Right now the influence is in production.
In production.
Yeah, that's right.
Is it because you're big in Spain? Are you like a giant bestseller in Spain?
No, I really don't.
I mean, you are, for me, the archetypal British horror writer.
Sure,
you, from the quotes I gave earlier, you represent everything that is great about British horror, except you've been basically ignored by the British film industry. You've had one TV thing which was done by the Canadians.
That's right, The Hunger, yes.
The Hunger TV show.
Yeah.
And other than that, there's been nothing. How do you feel about that? Have there been people optioning things over the years, and they've never come off?
There have been lots of options.
Oh, okay.
But they, in the main, as you say, they were not British. I mean.
Oh, so still not from this country.
There has been.
I mean, it annoys me, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience, that we see so much stuff coming on TV, which is kind of sub horror, written by people, Downton Abbey type horror type stuff, and yet here we've got a 50 years worth of work which could be adapted very easily into a TV series and TV movie, a real movie for God's sakes. I mean, if we still made, Stephen Volk get stuff done. A lot of our friends
he complains about it.
He complains, because it's always a problem, and Stephen Volk always complains. But I mean, and Stephen Gallagher get stuff done and whatever. Sure. And it just seems amazing to me that you've reached this stage. You're 72 years old now, and there's not been a British movie of a Ramsey Campbell, any of them, a novel, a story, or whatever. How does that make you feel? Are you furious about that?
No. I mean, I'd like to see it happen, but
is it likely to happen? Do we think?
Who knows? It happens when it happens. It's impossible to predict, isn't it?
Like lightning in a bottle, right?
Yeah. Because when you think about it, there are all sorts of writers who all of a sudden are film, and then huge numbers of films of
we saw a couple of adaptations with James Herbert stuff, which didn't really work, to be honest.
Sure.
But at least he got those.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and as much as I adore M.R. James, do we really need to keep seeing M.R. James stories at Christmas? Or maybe we could spread out a little bit, a little bit of Bateman here, a little bit of Macken there.
I would have thought so, definitely. I mean, obviously, there was that bizarre. It wasn't even an adaptation, was it? Whistle and I'll Come to You. That was a couple of years ago.
I
mean, John Hurt is very good as always, but all it had was the title.
Because they thought they could improve upon the original story.
I think my own sense of that was probably the only way they could sell it to the BBC as a product was to stick an M.R. James title on it. Nothing whatsoever to do with the original James,
But have you been approached over the years? Have people come to you and said, the Ramsey Campbell Theatre, like Ray Bradbury had one?
Years ago, something like that did happen, but it came to nothing.
Really?
But
to me, it amazes me.
Much so publishing is a bit ramshackle these days. How much more so is the film industry?
We might not even get into that question.
Well, that's right.
Right, guys, it's 9:20. I'm going to open this up to questions from the audience for a moment. We're going to go back towards the end. But is anybody got questions here in the audience?
Actually,
not Barry.
I think
anybody but Barry got questions in the audience?
I think they've all left because I can't see anybody.
Anyway, come on, guys. Anybody? Yeah, stand up, please. We've got no mics. Yeah.
I was just wondering, because you were talking about horror movies quite a lot, do you think that horror has been diluted by the sort of torture-porn nature of things like movies these days? Not just movies, but Netflix and everything. Horror's stopped being that kind of very, Snow White-esque concept and become a lot more obvious.
Well, there is stuff like that. Although to be fair, I think it wasn't. Depends on where we date it from, doesn't it? Because I mean, the Italian cinema was doing that, I suppose, in the 70s, we think, the 80s. But then, on the other hand, we still have films like, let's say, a favourite of mine recently, It Follows, or the Autopsy of Jane Doe, which seemed to me to be largely successful, or wonderfully, the final Twin Peaks series, which is just, as far as I'm concerned, pure dread at its best, on an absolutely visceral level. So I think these things are a trend. But ultimately, I think there's always been that sort of, not even a conflict really, but a kind of, contrast between explicit horror and the more suggestive kind. Even, the Val Lewton films were made in a way as a riposte to what Lewton saw as being the excessive explicitness of the Universal horror films. Now, clearly the Universal horror films have very considerable merits of their own, but it's equally good that they created the films like Cat People and I Walk with a Zombie as a kind of reaction to them. And I don't think any particular trend of horror will ever overwhelm the field. It may dominate for a little while, possibly, but I think all the elements always will revive themselves.
We've always talked about these things being cyclical anyway. In publishing. We've been around long enough that we've seen horror come and go as a genre, as a bestseller thing. I think it is different today than it was maybe 20 years ago. Yeah. But there is definitely a sense that everything comes around again, and what was old is new again, and whatever to that extent, definitely. So talking about horror in that way, do you believe in censorship in any form?
No.
Not at all. What about for children?
Well, that's not sensitive, is it? I mean, age.
Withholding
age recommendations.
Age recommendations.
Yeah, but yes, I think. Well, I'm not particularly I think we probably don't want 5-year-olds watching Cannibal Ferox as a random example. Sorry.
I've got a train to catch.
Oh, okay, man. Great to see you.
Bye, Ali. Take care. Bye.
Yes, sorry. As soon as you mentioned cannibalism, Ali always knew. Actually, he's just going to chew on somebody in the street. Well, no, I think age grading is but that's not sensitive, I don't think. Okay. Banning something is a different thing from recommending. But then, just as a general principle, the whole notion of age suitability. I'm just wondering, is anybody here in this room who has not read stuff that was not considered to be suitable for them at that age? It just seems to be quite a characteristic. I may be wrong, and I'm sorry if anybody here didn't do that, fair enough, obviously, no reason why you should, but it does seem to be quite characteristic of reading in this field and I suppose watching films.
Again, you was your story. I was 14 when I bumped into my first film, which was Quaint Mass on the Pit.
Yes.
It was my 14th birthday present from my parents. It was like, go off and see this and pretend to be 16.
Yes, of course. And of course, in America, most of the films...
Most stuff was available anyway.
Yeah.
Which might explain things like the shootings in Florida yesterday.
Well...
if you're allowing anybody to go and see this kind of stuff, that's why I asked the question.
Right.
Is there an argument to be said that maybe sometimes we do have to have that little barrier there? Or not? I know you're very liberal on this.
I think it's impossible to predict what effect it would have on the specific, viewer.
Of course it is.
And so, I certainly want to take care. Well, I think it's up to the individual. Don't know, parent, I suppose, really, as it tends to be in America, where
Yeah.
most films, the R rating is like the A rating used to be in Britain, which means, it's a recommendation. Young folk can go and see it, but only with an adult. So, for example, most Hitchcock films until Psycho, in fact, not most, all Hitchcock films up to Psycho in Britain were rated A,
Yeah.
or occasionally U, not very often. So, I was actually seeing really quite violent movies because you could go with your parents.
Adult accompaniment.
Yeah, in those days. So no, I mean, I'm certainly not in favour of banning anything. Well, unless obviously it's illegal.
Sure.
That's a different issue. But in terms of other content, no, I would not
Cool.
be. No.
Excellent. Another question.
Over here, Steve.
Okay.
Yeah, just one final,
Oh.
very quick thing.
Sure.
That's not an argument against not trying to write responsibly. That's a different matter.
Oh, I absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's your responsibility, not the audience's
Yes,
responsibility.
I
very
think
much so. Yeah.
I'm certainly in favour of for me, the sort of responsibility of the writer.
No, and as an editor, I do the same thing.
Yeah,
There are certain
yeah.
things that I will take out of a story because I
Right.
think it's inappropriate, because
right.
younger people could get hold of that
Right.
book and read that book on that reason. And
Right.
so you have to say, again, the age appropriate thing.
Right,
I've got to
right.
be aware where that's going to go at some
Right,
point.
right.
And
Although
you always
can't
have
really
to be aware
predict
of
that. I mean,
No, you can't.
as we stand, here am I reading Colour Out of Space when I'm 7 years old,
Yeah.
so, by that definition. But
Yeah,
anyway.
absolutely.
Sorry, anyway,
Over there.
sorry.
You mentioned Kingsley Amis before.
Yeah.
He's an early champion of mystery and science fiction. I
Yes.
wonder if you had any stories or encounters with him.
Sadly, I never met him, but I'm very fond of his work. And he was, of course, an early enthusiast in the mainstream for science fiction. He wrote New Maps of Hell, which is
a terrific
lots
book
of
about the genre.
Yeah,
It's about the whole field.
lots of fun. Yes, a very, very fine bit. And of course, he also wrote The Green Man, which is a splendid supernatural horror novel. And he wrote several short stories in the field as well, and a bunch of science fiction. So I mean, one of the interesting things was he was absolutely not a snob about the various genres. I mean, this is just a random thought, but if you want to see literary snobbery at its worst, there's a book called Amis and Son by, I can't remember who it's by now, but anyway, it's a book about Kingsley and Martin Amis, which is appallingly sniffy about science fiction and about the fact that Amis wrote about James Bond and the like. Well, to an embarrassing extent, but no. But sadly, I don't have any Kingsley Amis stories. I mean, we're friends of Harry. Well, alas, they're both gone now. But old friends Harry Harrison and Brian Aldiss. They were very fond of Kingsley Amis, and although I do remember, gosh. Oh yeah, well that's true. Yeah, well we won't say that. Well, you just did say it, but nobody heard it, and I didn't say it. I do remember. I think was at that time it was Brian and Harry and I were hanging out in Birmingham, weren't we, doing a signing. It wasn't actually turned into us sitting in a bistro and drinking immoderately and eating lots of olives, and people came in from Andromeda with their books. Lots of fun. But I think it was just when Kingsley Amis's memoirs had come out. I remember Brian said to Harry, or the other way about, they looked at the index and said, "Thank God we're not in it." So that's a kind of anecdote. That's the closest I can get.
You've met a lot of these people. I mean, I remember you.
Well, so have you.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
through you and through other people. But I remember, I think one of the first science fiction conventions I went to, you introduced me to James Blish, who I think you were playing cards with or something at that point.
Right.
And that kind of thing.
Who won?
I have no idea. It was way too late for me. I went to bed. But you've grown up with a lot of these people.
Yeah.
Whatever. Who are your heroes? Who are the people you look up to in our genre, in the horror genre maybe, or the movies?
Living or dead?
Doesn't matter.
Met
The people who've made an impact on you, people.
Oh gosh.
You go on.
Well, obviously we've already mentioned M.R. James and Lovecraft, but certainly Robert Aikman. Fritz.
And you knew Aikman. You were
Yes.
friends with
Oh, we
him.
knew
Yeah.
him well. Yes, in fact, he was lots of fun. Very. We should
I
say.
find the fact Aikman was lots of fun a very strange sentence. I only met him the once, and I did not find him lots of fun.
Well, what happened in your case now?
No, he was a fancy con. He had a totally miserable time, as far as I could tell.
Oh. No,
Well, as far as I
no.
could tell, he did. I was like, yeah, I was 18 years old or something.
Yeah,
but
no, he had a great time. You know, he was.
I remember
Yeah.
being in a room party with him,
Yes.
and Dave Holmes from Andromeda Bookshop
Yes.
was dancing around the room with a pair of ladies' knickers on his head.
Well.
And Robert Aikman seemed a little not happy about it. Let's put it that way.
Well, many of us mightn't be.
He thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, he did say to me, "Oh my God, it's not going to be full of bright young things, is it?"
Oh, certainly not full of bright young. I was there. Certainly not full of bright young
It
things.
would be full of decrepit old sods.
even more so now.
But I mean, who are your heroes? Who are the people?
Oh, sorry, but so
Yeah.
we've done those as well, yeah. But Fritz Leiber was
Fritz.
absolutely, well, not just as a great guy, you know, very gentlemanly, a wonderful writer. And he was the other, I left him out actually, along with M.R. James Lovecraft, Graham Greene, Nabokov. But Fritz really, again, I read him when I was 16, I think, yeah. In quantity, I read Knight's Black Agents, and specifically Smoke Ghost, which is, to my mind, you know, one of the absolutely crucial stories in the field of the 20th century.
And also,
where-
kind of like what you did, is actually a contemporary horror story.
That's because I read him.
And yeah, exactly.
That's
because
the
I was gonna
point.
Say, he did that and said, look, I'm going to do a story which is absolutely set
Yes.
in the here and now in Chicago and whatever. And people were like, oh wow,
Yes.
we can have ghosts now. On the,
Yes.
you know, on the air.
Indeed. I mean, it was to some extent, I think, you know, the recommendation of John W. Campbell,
Right.
who was, you know, he bought that story for Unknown, who wanted, you know, more contemporary supernatural and fantasy. But I think the other crucial thing about, about Smoke Ghost is that rather than the contemporary setting being invaded by the supernatural, and after all, when you think about it, you know, in M.R. James, it's a contemporary setting then.
Yes.
You know, Casting the Runes, you know, one of the supernatural warnings appears on an omnibus, you know, in the advertising above the seats.
That's
well,
right.
that was, you know, everyday,
At the time,
everyday
yeah.
experience of the reader.
Yeah.
But in Fritz's case, this is the crucial thing for me, is that the urban contemporary setting is not invaded, it's the source of the supernatural terror. That's the turning point.
Very much like your Liverpool.
Yeah, exactly, and that's where my
From the cellars onwards.
my cue came from,
Yeah.
absolutely. And in terms of cinema, good God, where do we even start? But I mean, well, obviously I've said Bidwell and Alain Resnais, who I continue to love, you know, Lester and Marion, about several other films too. But I mean, those are the main influences. I mean, people whose work I love, you know, David Lynch, who is the only director who can terrify me on an absolute visceral level these days in all sorts of different films. Hitchcock, Mizoguchi, you know, Jean Renoir. Oh, you know,
What about newer names? Who's anybody more recently?
Michael Haneke, I think, is a very considerable filmmaker. Who else? I'm very fond of Richard Linklater, who, you know, does all sorts of different stuff.
Different stuff. Oh,
You know, Philip Dick, you know, he did A Scanner Darkly as a strange
animated movie,
rotoscope
yes,
movie. He did Boyhood, was this extraordinary project where, you know, the characters age because he filmed them over several years.
Decades,
Yeah, that decade is absolutely right. I mean, I love the Before trilogy, you know, Before Midnight, Before, and so forth.
Yeah,
Tremendous,
family, yeah.
tremendous piece. Lord, who else?
Do you find? Well, let's take that one step further.
Go on.
Do you find in your writing that you're still trying to find ways to do something different even now? I mean, it seems to me that every book you do, even the books you've gone back to recently, which tend to be, and I'm going to use the term very loosely, Lovecraftian, you're still doing stuff which is different and pushing the envelope and whatever.
Well, I mean, I'm trying not to repeat myself,
Yeah.
you know, because...
Which, of course, a lot of horror writers love to repeat themselves,
Yeah.
just like the last book.
Well, in a sense, you know, you try not to do it, but you do it anyway. But you do your best
Subliminally or
not
whatever.
to,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
But you still, you know, still recurring themes that you... Well, in a sense, that's what you're about, you know.
It's you.
Can't,
Maybe
you
it's
can't
what
really...
defines you as a writer.
Yeah, I think so.
Any more questions?
There's one down the front.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Well, I'm so pleased, Ramsey, that you mentioned cinema, because like you, I'm a writer who loves cinema. And you mentioned Los Olvidados,
Yes, yes.
one of his greatest films, certainly one of the most bleakest, most pitiless endings ever in film, I think.
Yeah.
But really my question is about the location of horror. Years ago you wrote, I don't know if it was a book for the BFI or something, but you talked about great horror moments are not necessarily in horror fiction. They can appear in films, or they can appear in non-horror books and so on. And I found it very fascinating, because I'd never read a writer that actually made that statement before. I'd felt that, and I thought it was very obvious. You were the first person I'd read who actually said that. I'd thought that myself, actually, which also made me think that one of the reasons why you're such a fine writer as well is you're very eclectic, because I'm sure you read other books other than horror and so on, and you watch movies, and you love classical music, and these are all interests of mine as well, it's true, but you specifically hone in on the genre of horror, it's true. So when I was sort of thinking about formulating this question, well, it's sort of a tease this question, to say, would you write like a straight novel, which was like non-horror, a very normal, kind of naturalistic novel, and so on, you know, which just had little horror moments in it, and so on, actually. I mean, has that ever appealed to you, and so on?
Well, in a sort of weird way, maybe I've occasionally done something along those lines, you know. I mean, there are stories that seem to be largely narratives without any obvious, I suppose something like The Long Lost maybe was an old, something I wrote now about some 20-some years ago, which doesn't have very much in the way of, and I suppose, I mean, funny enough, it was Kim, I know you made this point, many years ago.
That came up,
yeah. It was some, I forget, was it an obsession? I forget. I think your argument was basically that you didn't need, in a sense, you didn't need the supernatural or fantastic element to make these things happen to the characters. Yeah. In a sense, I suppose I'm in some cases anyway. You know, I'm just writing this stuff, and the supernatural is certainly not incidental. For me, it's an addition. It's a crucial element, an enriching element. Actually, is the word I want to use. But I don't think I'd want to do without it. I've written the occasional short story, certainly, which you know has no generic element, I don't think. But even though I suppose you know it's not that unlike what I do anyway. So
well, I thought what was interesting about that piece is because I think you were inviting the reader to be interested in many other things other than horror.
Oh yes, I think
and then
that
you will enjoy horror even more.
Yes, I think that's
because horror is part of a great literary tradition.
Yeah,
of course, you know.
Certainly for me it is. Yes.
Of course, some of the older practitioners like Henry James, for example, you shouldn't just read the Henry James ghost stories. Read his novels as well, and that's where they come from.
Absolutely, yes. In fact, I think there's more to it than that. I think that you know, well, obviously there were people like, well, even someone like Poe did not exclusively write horror. In fact, to be fair, Poe seemed to almost to invent several short story genres, or if not all by himself, certainly by refining the Gothic tendency. So he invents the detective story. He does.
Absolutely.
He invents, if you like, the sort of comical horror story of something like Hop Frog, extremely gruesome, but sort of horrible, you know, sort of ghastly comedy to it as well.
Yes.
But part of the point is, now, in fact, Robert Aikman used to make the point, something along these lines, that a lot of the classics of the field were not written by specialists. I mean, and yet, those are the stories in the main that are remembered by those writers. So, I mean, I don't mean to denigrate his work by any means, but do we mostly remember much by W.W. Jacobs except The Monkey's Paw? And yet he wrote hundreds of short stories. He actually wrote a book's worth of supernatural and macabre tales, to be fair, which were collected, but in the main, he was a mainstream writer. And you know, a lot of the great work in the field actually comes out of the mainstream. Indeed, it was by no means uncommon for, and actually it's happening again now to some extent, that mainstream anthologies of short stories would include a few horror stories, you know, supernatural horror stories or ghost stories, and I think the overlap of those is quite considerable anyway, without drawing attention to the fact that that was what they were. And equally, there were lots of writers. I mean, Graham Greene wrote half a dozen stories in the field. William Faulkner wrote several. And well, we could name many other writers.
Yeah.
And to come at the other way, in fact, I made this point elsewhere, but just briefly, one of the books that shaped my view of the field, crucially, I read this when I was 11 years old. In fact, it may have even been the very first hardcover I ever bought, saving up my pocket money, all the 15 shillings I think was, by gum, when I was 11. And that was Best Horror Stories, edited by John Keir Cross for Faber, which is kind of interesting to put into context, because this was just a couple of years after the horror comic panic, where, you know, questions were asked in Parliament and all the EC comics were banned in Britain. Technically they still are, by the way, you can still not import them, so you won't be stopped, but, you know, they never did rescind that law. And it was almost immediately before Hammer Films and the like got, you know, the same sort of press that video nasties would get in the 80s. You know, this is beyond anything that anybody sane could possibly want to watch. Now, here was John Keir Cross editing this anthology for Faber, Best Horror Stories, and it included people like Poe and M.R. James, Bierce and so forth, but it also had Graham Greene and Faulkner, Angus Wilson, and most crucially to me when I was 11, it had Bartleby by Herman Melville, which is a 40-page novella, you know, which is a psychological study of a, if you like, an empty man, you know, someone who dies of having no personality. And Keir Cross himself said in the introduction that many people would not think this was a horror story at all, but for him it was, so he's putting it in. And the thing was, you know, I'd spent what about a week's worth of pocket money on this story, you know, £0.50 worth, since that's how much it occupied in the book. And I thought it fitted. I thought this, yeah, I mean, I thought this was, it did in some way belong in this book. And I think that was, in a way, you know.
That's because we're a broad church. Horror,
yeah.
Horror has always been a broad
well, yes,
church.
indeed, but at 11 years old, it was kind of interesting that, you know, I took that view.
Barry, question.
Okay, Steve, you mentioned James Herbert, who's a writer not noted for the elegance of his writing.
That's debatable, but I have to carry on.
So your story, Ramsey, there's a sense that you've paid particular attention to the prose.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself as a literary writer?
Well, I just see myself as doing what I do, but I mean, I'd like to think of being a sort of the literary tradition of the field, if you like. Sure. So, yes, if you, in brief, I suppose so. You know, I will take care over the prose as much as I possibly could, you know, particularly in the rewrite, which is a ruthless process.
How often do you rewrite? How much do you write, do you think?
Well, I mean, basically, his first draft is longhand, and then, you know, the usual thing, I kind of leave it for a little while and do some other stories,
Sure.
and then come back to it, at which point you can take a more objective view. At which point I can usually see there are things wrong with it, but more often than not, I don't know how to fix them. I just have a general sense of this is not good, you know. But when I get to the keyboard, well, the computer, obviously now, you know, used to be a typewriter there, but much more so than ever. As soon as I get to the screen to rewrite, a completely ruthless mindset comes into play, and I don't know where this turning point was, because I can certainly see way back in early stuff that I was trying to salvage as much as I possibly could of the first draft, right? These days I try to get rid of and improve everything as possible. And, you know, anything that doesn't please me goes or gets redone.
Put one side possible for use later on and something else, or do you just discard it nowadays?
Well, if I've actually jettisoned something significant, then no. I mean, if it has its own identity, I might keep it for using something else. Yeah. Yeah.
Look, we're going to run out of time, which is a problem. So I've got one last question, and then because we've got to get out of here by 10, I'm afraid. Otherwise, we could go for another hour.
Just lock the doors. Let's stay. Yeah.
Final question: what scares Ramsey Campbell?
You.
A non-gliver.
Yeah, it's all right.
A non-gliver.
Seriously. Seriously. Oh, well, look around the world and tell me why I wouldn't write what I write. Basically, you know. I mean, oh, good God, where do we start? Gullibility, the rush to espouse belief systems that take away your right to question. I mean, the sense of increasing derangement, you know, in various directions where we look, including in highest places. That sort of thing, you know, everyday experience.
Do you have hope? Do you have hope?
Well, yes, ultimately,
do you see horror as a positive force in the world, as fiction and film, or what? Well, I've always seen it as very much as a
I
positive
certainly don't see it as a negative thing.
Exactly.
No, I mean, I think the kind of fiction, any kind of art that enriches the imagination, I'm for it. And I certainly think the best of our field does that.
Excellent, wonderful way to end. Ramsey Campbell, thank you very much.